Okay, welcome back. We're live. All right. So, welcome back to another episode here of our little podcast. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about the methylation cycle. So, this is something that I think I got introduced to towards the end of chiropractic school for me. It was at the time, I thought it was something that was like, whoa, everyone's missing out on this. And I think it's really important. It's really, really cool. I think there might be even practitioners that use this methylation cycle like as a way to pretty much like run a practice, which I think has like some merit. It's interesting, but I think what's going on is it's getting made to be much more confusing than it actually is. So the point of today is to essentially take the methylation cycle, break it down a little bit into a kind of simpler, more digestible form. And then we'll kind of leave it out there. And then, some of the important nutrients, things that you need that are worth focusing on to help optimize this. So when we're talking about the methylation group, we have to talk about, what is methylation? So methylation is simply just a transfer of 4 atoms. So it's a carbon atom, 3 hydrogen atoms that are all connected. That is considered a methyl group. It's a CH3 group if you see it in a chemical form. CH3, that's a methyl group. And methylation is simply transferring one methyl group to another. Now, as an analogy, one of the ones that I've used for this is basically it's a way to turn switches on and off in the body. And these switches have multiple different gears. So, if you ever, played with, mechanical sets or train sets where there are, gears you have to put into place, kind of like how the methylation cycle works in our body. At least that's our understanding of it. Now, why is the methylation cycle important? Well, the methylation cycle is important because it's involved in gene expression. Now, this is where the idea of epigenetics come into play here. Now, 50 years ago or more than that at this point, when they discovered, the double helix and how things are run, it was basically the idea that our genes essentially dictate everything that goes on in the rest of our lives. We're basically what happens is a consequence of our genetic makeup, of our genetic material. What happened over time is we finally got to a point where it's like, oh, wait, actually, our decisions we make, how we think, how we act, how we move, what we eat, how we sleep, our interactions, our relationships, our time in nature, all of these actually have the ability to influence genetic expression. And this ultimately ended up becoming known as epigenetics. This is kind of where the methylation cycle kind of comes into play. So, the methylation cycle is essentially this mechanism for on and off switches for hundreds of different reactions in the body that affect the brain, our immune system, inflammation, antioxidant production in the body, and everything in between. So through epigenetic changes, we are able to flip on and off certain switches or how certain genes are expressed through the methylation cycle. So essentially, all of those things that I mentioned, relationships, what we eat, who we hang out with, sleep, movement, time in nature, everything else, all of that stuff is going to affect how these switches and gears are moving and turned on and off. So methylation is able to turn something on through methylation or turn something off through demethylation, taking a methyl group away. And this exchange is how these things kind of communicate back and forth here. So, and through that, it actually has what we found so far is that it actually affects over 200 different processes in the body. And because it affects such a wide array of different things, it can, at the end of the day, affect, like I said, brain function, immune response, our detoxification pathways, DNA expression and repair, inflammation, and hormone production. And once you get into that kind of realm, that breadth of things that you're covering, you can see how it's not necessarily tied to one specific thing. It's a simple mechanism, but it affects a lot of different things. And I think that's where the confusion comes in, because it is able to affect a variety of different things. But the actual function is fairly simple. Now, there's a lot of different steps. There's a lot of different pathways you can take, kind of offshoots of it. But fundamentally, that's what's happening. It's an exchange of methyl groups. Now, how these are transferred, there's something known as a universal methyl donor. You have to get these methyl groups from somewhere. And usually that comes from a compound known as SAMe or S-adenosylmethionine. You'll see it abbreviated SAMe, capital SAM, lowercase e, SAMe. SAMe donates these methyl groups to other substances, which then enables these different systems in the body to turn on, switch these on, whether it's the cardiovascular system, some neurological process, reproductive organs, detoxification systems, those functions, these get switched on when those methyl groups get donated by something known as SAMe. Now, one of the genes you'll hear about that gets a lot of press, especially nowadays, is known as the MTHFR gene. Sometimes it'll be shortened to be the mother effer gene, as you might imagine, just due to the acronym itself. But that is the gene that is claimed to kind of cause a lot of the issues that come along with this, that if there's a mutation here, that can affect your methylation. But again, even if there is a mutation, as we talked about before with epigenetics, how those things are expressed is ultimately going to be a byproduct of how we treat ourselves and the environment we put ourselves in. So it definitely goes both ways. So even if there is some sort of genetic mutation, even if there is something on, that doesn't necessarily mean that that is expressed. Whether or not something is really expressed is going to be due to the circumstances we have in our life and how we approach life. So, it comes back to that saying, genetics may load the gun, but, what we do actually pulls the trigger. That's a good analogy to kind of keep in mind. So in this cycle, get a little technical here. There's different compounds. So we have SAMe, who's our methyl donor. And in this cycle, the methylation cycle, methionine is converted into homocysteine, and in that process, a methyl group is released. Now, sometimes you'll see, you might have heard of homocysteine. That's a marker for inflammation. So if that is high, that means this methylation cycle probably isn't functioning properly. If we're getting a buildup of homocysteine, that means it is not going through this cycle. We don't have the cofactors we need. Sometimes that's B12. Sometimes it could be other things. That could be, an issue in metabolizing homocysteine. So if it gets stuck on that, if it's not able to clear it or, continue working through that cycle, that's when that gets high. That's when we get, that marker that we see that's associated with higher levels of inflammation. Okay. So hope we didn't lose you there. So when we're not methylating properly, it could happen for a variety of different reasons. So, certain molecules can be are not produced in an efficient manner, and these are things that we need. So things like glutathione are produced at the end of this methylation cycle. Our liver detoxification pathways are somewhat controlled by this methylation cycle. So if this is not functioning properly, we're not detoxifying. Our liver is not going through phase 1, phase 2 as well as it could. Coenzyme Q10, that is something that we need for a lot of things, but particularly for heart function. So is our heart able to contract and do its job properly over and over again? The heart does not stop when we go to sleep. So, coenzyme 10 production and function is going to be affected to some degree. Melatonin, again, you're seeing how these sleep and wake cycles kind of come in here. So, melatonin, it is primarily, we know it as the hormone needed for sleep, but it's also one of the most powerful antioxidants we have. It initiates a lot of the healing responses when that gets high. Melatonin production is really induced in the state of darkness. So if we're on, screens, particularly late at night, if we're, exposed to a lot of artificial light at night, if we're not in good sleeping situations, if we're not getting to sleep at a really decent hour, if we're up late at night and we're not really getting key sleep, particularly between the hours of like 10 to 3 a.m., that money sleep, really, this is going to have you're going to have issues with melatonin production. This could happen for a variety of reasons, but that's definitely affected here. Also, other hormones, so like serotonin or dopamine, epinephrine and norepinephrine. So a lot of these are produced primarily in the gut. Serotonin, we know a large percentage of it is produced in the gut. Same with dopamine. If we have gut issues, this could lead to things like anxiety and depression. So, and we know that again because dopamine and serotonin largely comes from the gut. So, when you get those gut feelings, those things are real. They have connections to things like the vagus nerve, which connect essentially our organs to our brain, right? So we have to make sure that that's functioning properly. Is it an underlying gut issue that we have to address? Is there an infection that we have to take care of, a co-infection, or some level of toxicity we kind of have to clean out so that we can absorb as much as we need kind of going in? Nitric oxide production is also affected here. Now, we can stimulate nitric oxide production through actually nasal breathing. So that's actually something we're going to get into another time, but important to kind of keep in mind. Also, amino acids like cysteine and taurine, things we need for energy production. If we are not producing those on a regular basis as much as we need, we're going to have issues kind of down the road with that. So, it could lead to those issues that we're kind of all mentioning. So all of this is related to the methylation cycle in some way. These are some of the downstream either systems that are affected or compounds that are affected when it's not chugging along properly. So that's where it kind of gets confusing, even though it's simple in terms of what it is and what it does. The downstream effects are fairly broad. And while it is a decent mechanism, I think to help, explain to clients and patients, it's not everything, but it's an important concept to still understand. And I still think it's important to kind of understand it. Now, what can disrupt the cycle? Like I said, there's an inability to convert methionine to homocysteine. So we need this is where the MTHFR mutations come in. We need that functioning properly so we can get that conversion. If you have high homocysteine, like I said, that's a marker for inflammation. It's associated with increased risks of heart disease and cancer. There's also a bunch of different other chronic diseases. Could be autoimmune, could be liver issues. Fat malabsorption, everything in between can be affected if the cycle is disrupted. The other things that can disrupt the cycle are low amounts of certain B vitamins like riboflavin, which is B2, folate, which is B9. And I would not, we'll get into food sources later, but I would not recommend a folic acid supplement. Those are synthetic. I would stay away. B12. So particularly if you're 100% plant-based or vegan, B12 is something that you're going to have to get in there. It's really non-negotiable. How you do that is going to be up to you, but it's really useful to kind of do that. And whether that's nutritional yeast or a supplement, there's got to be a way that you're getting it in. Toxic chemical exposure. Is it mold in your house? Is it heavy metals? Do you have to get rid of dental fillings, amalgam fillings? Is it old furniture or the mattress you're sleeping on or the carpet you have in your house? There are tests you can get done at home to check for mold. If it's a place you're living in, these are things that we're going to have to get in touch with and learn more about if it is the trigger of kind of what's going on. Stresses, whether they're emotional, biochemical, or physical, are going to affect this to some degree. Same thing with hypothyroidism. So if there is an underactive thyroid, again, thyroid's more or less the gas pedal of the body. We'll talk about that in a few later episodes. But if it's underactive, you're going to have a sluggish methylation cycle. So we have to make sure that gas pedal is on. So certain things that could play a role in that, alcohol, caffeine, low iron, low selenium, low iodine. A variety of different things. Got to make sure those mineral balances are there and then supporting that in a proper way. But we'll get more into that in other episodes. So, it is possible that, something like folate can be useful. There's a variety of other, like I said, different things that can be causing some kind of issues here. So the question is like, what can you do to help optimize this? Well, the first thing we're going to need to do is make sure we're getting a lot of those nutrients that I mentioned. So those B vitamins are particularly important. So like riboflavin really important for that. It's a really important energy production vitamin. Those can be found in a variety of different foods, things like beans, green leafy vegetables, lamb, salmon, mushrooms, almonds, liver, kidneys, all good sources of B2. Cobalamin. So again, I've kind of mentioned this. This is going to be your B12. So you'll find this in animal foods, although they're kind of in some cases they're actually supplemented B12 too, because really B12 is made from bacteria. That's a story for another day. But animals generally don't produce their own B12 either. They're consuming it through bacteria. But you need a source of that regardless. So getting B12, whether it is from animal foods, if you don't choose to have that, like I said, there's something like nutritional yeast you can get a part of, or you can supplement with something like a methylcobalamin. I prefer that one. That one tends to be better. Folate, listen, this is a big one that's usually missed out on. Reason being, particularly if you live a SAD lifestyle, a standard American lifestyle, folate's just one of those nutrients you're going to miss out on because they're in a lot of foods that people don't eat. It's in the dark leaf folate. If you think of folate, foliage, that's always how I think of it. Folate, foliage. You need some sort of plants. Your leafy green vegetables, peas, squash, lentils, okra, lima beans, kidney beans, really lentils. So a lot of different veggies, a lot of different legumes. These are things that most people do not consume on a regular basis in the standard American approach. So like if you have to find sources of folate, that's where they come from. And it's really not hard to understand then why, if we're following a standard American lifestyle here, why that would be something that's missing. Speaking of which, the number one mineral that I see deficiencies in, and this is kind of what is backed up in at least the literature here in the US, is magnesium. Now, somewhere between 60 and 80-ish% of US citizens are deficient in magnesium. And again, it's really the same foods you're going to find folate in. There's a lot of crossover here, particularly dark leafy greens, legumes, nuts, seeds. Those are things that very few Americans eat on a regular basis. You can find them in certain cereal grains. Now, when we go to that route, obviously I would prefer if they're organic, if you can get them. But other things like millet, avocado, figs, peas, okra, oatmeal, any of those types of grains, ideally, if we could get those organic, that's going to go, a really long way. You want to stay away from the pesticides that could potentially make these problems even worse. The last thing we want to make sure is, I mentioned some different amino acids earlier, things like taurine, cysteine. So we want to make sure we're getting enough protein. Now, obviously, animal sources, you can get all these, and I see this issue all the time with those who want to go plant-based and vegan. There is a way you can do it, and it's honestly not that difficult, but you have to just be willing to have a bit more variety in what you're eating on a regular basis. But again, beans, lentils, peas, broccoli, quinoa, nuts and seeds, nut butters, you can get more than enough protein from these sources. The question is really, are you getting enough variety in it? That's ultimately what it's going to come down to at the end of the day. Is there enough variety? Because you have to be able to get the complement of all those different amino acids, and that really comes with just having a variety of different foods. So, and usually, for example, like combining a whole grain with any type of pulse, legume, lentil, chickpea, it is going to give you that full complement, and that's before even adding in a bunch of different, leafy greens and vegetables and all other fun things like that. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of how methylation is going to work here. So I hope that was pretty straightforward. Again, really those nutrients, B2, folate, B9, B12, protein, magnesium, those are the big ones that I see missing in a lot of, in clients, patients I've worked with. Is there something underlying that's an issue? Is it hypothyroid? Is it a thyroid issue? Is it a gut issue where you're having issues with absorption? Those are underlying things that we would have to address and then kind of reach back and come back to address that and then kind of replace those things. But that is something that you would have to like work with someone on, because that's a little bit more detailed and would take a little bit more time and effort. So if that's something that you're interested in, you could always reach out to me. You could go on my website if you want to schedule an appointment with me, or at least an initial consult. I'd be more than happy to help you with you in this on your journey. So thank you for tuning in. Hope you have a lovely rest of your Thursday. I'll see you later. Okay.